A laughter started before she even sat down. It wasn't loud. That was the thing nobody tells you about rooms like that. The cruelty in those places is quiet, a tightening at the corners of the mouth. A glance exchanged across a mahogany table. A small exhale through the nose that means we both know she doesn't belong here. Fatoumata Diallo heard it, the moment she stepped through the glass doors of the 42nd floor, and she didn't flinch. She had heard that sound before, learned, a long time ago, that flinching was what they were waiting for. Boardroom Advantage Capital Partners faced west over downtown Toronto. On a clear morning you could see the lake from up there, a gray-blue line pressed flat against the horizon. It was a Thursday in late October, and the maples along Bay Street had gone the color of embers. Fatoumata noticed this on her way up in the elevator. The trees, the sky, the way the city looked almost gentle from a height. Noticed it the way she always noticed small, beautiful things. Quietly, carefully, filing it away for later. She was 29 years old. She was wearing the navy blazer her grandmother had sent from Montreal the week before. A blazer that had belonged to her grandmother's second employer, a Haitian-Canadian woman who had built the first black-owned law firm on St. Catherine Street in 1974. Her grandmother had kept it in a cedar box for 40 years, wear it when it matters, she had said, and Fatoumata had not opened the box until that morning. Receptionist on 42 had looked at her twice, then looked away. Boardroom was already full when she arrived. 12 people seated around a table that probably cost more than her first 2 years of rent. Water glasses, leather portfolios, low hum of a room that has already decided what it thinks. At the head of the table sat Callum Graves, Senior Managing Director at Vantage, 26 years with the firm, man who had the particular kind of confidence that grows when no one has ever seriously challenged it. Was looking at something on his phone when Fatoumata walked in. He didn't look up immediately. That was intentional. She recognized it as intentional because she had studied people like Callum Graves her entire career, and she knew every instrument in their orchestra. At his right sat a woman named Patricia Morrow, VP of Client Relations, silver hair pulled back tight, a silk blouse the color of ash. Patricia had smiled when Fatoumata entered. It was not a warm smile. It was the smile you give when you're already composing the story you'll tell about this later. Beside her, a younger man, tall, sandy-haired, the kind of handsome that comes from good orthodontics and inherited confidence, leaned back slightly in his chair and looked at Fatoumata the way a person looks at something they cannot immediately categorize. His name, she would learn, was Fletcher Oakes. He had been at Vantage for 3 years. He believed with complete sincerity that he had earned everything he had. "I help you?" Callum Graves said, finally looking up. His tone was not unkind, precisely. That was how these things worked. The weapon was courtesy, sharpened to a point. "I'm here for the 9 o'clock, Fatoumata said. Her voice was even. It was always even. Something passed across the table. Not a word, not quite a look. More like a frequency, a shared understanding. 9 o'clock is a closed session, Patricia said, smoothing the already smooth front of her portfolio. Board and senior leadership only. Were you perhaps looking for the junior associates briefing? That's on 31. I'm not looking for 31, Fatoumata said. She set her bag on the table. It was a soft leather bag, dark brown, unbranded. From the front pocket she took out a single item, a slim, weathered notebook with a brass clasp and no markings on the cover. She set it beside her water glass. Callum Graves was looking at her now with the full attention of a man who had decided something was mildly amusing. "What's your name?" he said. "Fatoumata Diallo." A pause. He looked at Patricia. Patricia looked at the notebook. "And who invited you up here, Ms. Diallo?" "The chairman's office sent the invitation," she said. "September 14th. I have the correspondence if you need it." Fletcher Oaks made a sound, not quite a laugh, but the shape of one. A small dismissal, released into the air of the room like a coin dropped from a great height. "Chairman," Callum said, with the warmth of a man who is very sure he's in on a joke. "And which chairman would that be?" "Augustin Beaumont Tremblay," she said. The room didn't go silent. Exactly. It was more that the texture of the room changed, like a pressure shift, the kind you feel in your ears. Callum Graves said nothing for a moment. Then, "You know Gus." Not a question, more like a recalibration. "He signed the letter personally," Fatoumata said, and she uncapped the pen she had taken from the outside pocket of her bag. It was a silver pen, not ostentatious, with a single word engraved along the barrel in small serif letters. From where Callum sat, he couldn't read it. From where Fletcher sat, he might have been able to see that it was a name. He didn't look closely enough. Opened her notebook to the first page. "Shall we begin?" she said. He had not always been this still. There was a version of Fatoumata Diallo who had been loud about everything. Loud in her joy, loud in her frustration, loud in the particular way of a girl who grew up being told that everything she felt was too much. She had grown up in Gatineau, the daughter of a nurse and an engineer who had come from Dakar in the 90s with credentials that this country had immediately, efficiently, rendered useless. Her father had spent 3 years requalifying for work that was half what he had been trained for. Her mother had done the same. They never talked about bitterness. They talked about Tuesday and what was for dinner and whether Fatoumata had finished her reading. And she had always finished her reading. Had gone to Ottawa for her undergraduate degree, then to McGill for her MBA. She had graduated second in her class at McGill, and the person who graduated first had been handed 3 interview calls the week after convocation, and Fatoumata had sent out 47 applications and heard back from 4. She didn't say this out loud very often. She just noted it, carefully, in the same part of her mind where she kept all the other things she had noted carefully over the years. A private ledger, an exact accounting. Had worked at 2 firms before Vantage. At both, she had been the person who produced the work that others presented. At both, she had been passed over for roles that were later explained to her as requiring a different kind of experience. She had learned what that meant. She had moved on. Had met Augustin Beaumont Tremblay at a conference in Halifax 18 months ago. A conference she had almost not attended because she couldn't fully justify the flight on her budget. Had been sitting beside her at a panel on institutional capital allocation, and they had disagreed, politely and precisely, about a methodology the speaker had cited. And at the end of the session he had turned to her and said, simply, "You should have been up there instead of him." Had talked for 2 hours after that. Was 71 years old, the founder and majority shareholder of Beaumont Tremblay Holdings, the parent company of Vantage Capital Partners and 4 other firms. He had a reputation for being deliberate, patient, and correct. He also had a reputation, in certain circles, for making personnel decisions that no one expected until they were already done. What happened between Halifax and that Thursday in October in the boardroom on the 42nd floor was not in the end a complicated story. Augustin Beaumont Tremblay had watched the Vantage portfolio stagnate for 3 years. He had watched leadership double down on strategies that were comfortable and tired. He had watched talent leave quietly through a side door. He had made a decision, offered Fatoumata the role of chief investment officer in a letter drafted by his personal legal counsel, countersigned by 2 board members, and sent to her on September 14th. Had said yes. Had told no one, because she had been asked not to. "I want to see how they treat you when they don't know," he had told her. "I always want to see that." Acer, the meeting continued. Our Callum Graves had recovered his composure quickly. That was one thing you had to give him. He was good at recovery. He had shifted back into the mode of a man who was tolerating a minor disruption with grace. Meant he was not listening to anything Fatoumata said with any genuine attention. He was performing patience. The people around the table followed his lead, as they always did. Rooms like that one run on the gravity of whoever sits at the top. It was Patricia, who finally couldn't hold it. 40 minutes into the session, Fatoumata had outlined a restructuring of the firm's mid-market portfolio, a quiet, precise, extensively documented proposal that she had prepared over 6 weeks. When she finished, the room was still for a moment. And Patricia said, "This is very ambitious for someone at your level." It was delivered pleasantly, almost warmly. Fatoumata looked at her. "What level do you think I'm at?" "Well," Patricia gave a small rehearsed laugh. "Gus is lovely, of course. We all adore him. But this feels like an early career presentation. A lot of enthusiasm. Some of these assumptions." "Assumptions are sourced," Fatoumata said. She turned 3 pages in her notebook and set it flat on the table so the nearest person could see. "All of them. If there's a specific one you'd like to dispute, I'm happy to walk through it." Patricia looked at the notebook, then at Callum, then back at Fatoumata. "Callum, do you want to?" "Where did you say you worked before this?" Callum said. "Didn't say," Fatoumata replied. Fletcher Oaks was watching her now with a different expression than before. The categorization problem had not resolved itself, and this seemed to be bothering him in a way he couldn't articulate. "Look," Callum said, and he leaned forward slightly, in the manner of a man who is being very reasonable, very patient, as a personal gift to you. "I'm not trying to be unkind here, but you have to understand how this looks. You walk in here on Gus's name with a proposal for restructuring a portfolio you've had, 6 weeks to look at? The people in this room have spent years on these positions. Some of us have spent decades." "On 26 years," Fatoumata said. Callum paused. "I'm sorry?" "I've been with the firm 26 years," she said. "I read your profile before I came." Something moved across his face that was not quite anger and not quite anything else. "That's my point," he said. "That's exactly my point. You don't just read a profile and..." Or opened. It opened quietly, because Augustin Beaumont Tremblay did everything quietly. He was a tall man, older now than the photos on the company website, wearing a gray suit with no tie and the same deliberate unhurry he had worn in Halifax. Beside him was his executive assistant, a man named Theodore, who had worked for him for 16 years and who carried a slim folder and said nothing. Callum Graves stood up. Everyone at the table stood up. Fatoumata remained seated, not out of disrespect, out of the simple fact that she had known he was coming and she had nothing to prove by standing. "Down, please," Augustin said, with the ease of a man who has never needed to raise his voice to be heard. He moved to the empty chair at the end of the table opposite Callum, the other head. He looked around the room with the calm attention of someone who has been reading a room since before most of the people in it were born. His eyes rested on Fatoumata for a moment, a small nod. Then he looked at Callum. "I see you've had the chance to meet Ms. Diallo," he said. "We're just," Callum started. "Good," Augustin said. "Then I don't need to make an introduction." He opened the folder Theodore had placed on the table. Fatoumata Diallo joins Vantage as Chief Investment Officer, effective the 1st of November. The documentation was filed with the board this morning. I trust you've all seen your emails. The room was absolutely still. The kind of still that happens when 12 people simultaneously understand that they have made a mistake, and the mistake was significant, and there is no graceful way out of it. Patricia Morrow was looking at the surface of the table. Fletcher Oaks had gone the color of the ash silk blouse. Callum Graves was still standing. He hadn't sat back down when Augustin told everyone to sit, and now he was standing at the head of the table like a man on a very small piece of ground that was getting smaller. He looked at Fatoumata. He looked at Augustin. He opened his mouth and then closed it. "Alam," Augustin said gently, "you may want to sit." Ed, he sat. What people remember later is always a detail. Not the big moment. The moment is almost too large to hold. It's the detail that stays. The glass of water nobody touched, the sound the chair made when it was pushed back, the way the sky outside had gone a deeper gray while no one was watching. What Fatoumata remembered later was the notebook. She had closed it when Augustin walked in, and she had set her pen on top of it, and she had looked at the engraving on the barrel. The name her mentor, Dr. Celeste Beaumont, had used throughout 40 years of practice. The name on the first paper ever published in Canada on emerging markets capital theory by a black woman. Dr. Celeste Beaumont had given Fatoumata that pen 3 years ago in a coffee shop on Queen Street West, when Fatoumata was still trying to decide if this industry was one she could survive. "You don't decide if you can survive it," Celeste had said. "You just keep your notes exact and your voice steady. The rest has a way of sorting itself out." Celeste Beaumont Tremblay, Augustin's late sister. No one in that boardroom had known. She had never volunteered it because it wasn't the point. The point, her point. The one she had been building toward through the MBA and the 2 firms and the 47 applications and the 40 years of her parents' careful, dignified, unrewarded patience was not the connection. The point was the work. It had always been the work. After the meeting ended and people filed out in the particular silence of people who are each composing a private story, in which they were not as bad as they were, Augustin stayed behind. He poured himself a glass of water. He sat down across from her. "How was it?" he said. "Instructive," she said. I smiled. It was a tired smile, but real. It usually is. He looked at the pen on the table. "She would have liked today." "I think she planned it," Fatoumata said. "In some way. She had a long view of things. Always did." He paused. "Callum will hand in his resignation by the end of the week. You don't need to do anything about that. Patricia will be trickier. She's good at her job when she isn't protecting territory. That'll be your call." "I know," Fatoumata said. "Fletcher Oaks," he said, "surprised me. He came and found me in the hallway before I came in. Said he thought the room was treating a colleague badly." He looked at her. "I thought you should know that." Analyzery. She thought about this. She filed it in the private ledger, in a different column than the one where she kept the other things. "I'll remember," she said. Augustin stood, took his folder and buttoned his jacket. At the door he paused. 42nd floor is yours. Now, the view's better in the afternoon, by the way, when the light comes off the lake." Then he was gone. Fatoumata sat alone at the long table. Looked at the pen. She looked at the notebook. She looked out the window at the maples along Bay Street, still burning, ember orange against a sky going gray. Thought of her father, up at 5:30 every morning to catch the first bus. She thought of her mother, standing in a hospital hallway in compression stockings and a too small name badge, performing expertise that half the people walking past her would never credit to her. She thought of 47 unanswered emails and a cedar box kept closed for 40 years, and Dr. Les Beaumont in a coffee shop on Queen Street saying your voice steady in the way that people say things they mean absolutely. I opened the notebook to the next blank page. Wrote the date at the top. Then she began. Some rooms take a long time to get right. Some doors are heavier than they look. Some truths sit in ledgers that no one audits for years and years, until the right person walks through with exact notes and a steady voice and simply calmly opens the book. On a Thursday in late October in Toronto, with the lake flat and gray on the horizon, that room finally had what it had needed for a very long time. There's a moment in Fatoumata's story that I keep coming back to, not the big reveal, not the silence that fell over the room when Augustine spoke her name and her title in the same breath. It's the cedar box. A blazer kept folded for 40 years, saved for a moment that hadn't arrived yet. That kind of patience isn't passive. It's a decision, made quietly, every single day. I think about what it actually costs to walk into a room that has already decided about you. Not just emotionally, though that cost is real, but in the accumulation of small deliberate choices. Fatoumata didn't arrive at that boardroom on 42 because she got lucky or because she knew the right person. Arrived because she kept her notes exact, and her voice steady when every version of that room had told her, in 100 different polite and impolite ways, that her voice wasn't the one they were waiting to hear. That's not luck. That's character. That's something you build in the years before anyone is watching. What undid Callum Graves wasn't arrogance. Exactly. It was the assumption that his wait 26 years in a room gave him the right to determine who else belonged in it. He had mistaken tenure for truth, and Patricia, careful, competent Patricia, had let the instinct to protect her own position override her better judgment. Those aren't villainous failures. They're ordinary ones, kind that accumulate so gradually. You don't notice them until the day the door opens, and everything you assumed turns out to have been wrong. The hardest thing to hold on to when you're the person being laughed at is the knowledge that the laughter says nothing true about you. It takes a kind of clear-headedness that most of us have to practice, a willingness to separate what is being said from what is actually so. Fatoumata had spent years developing that separation, not because she was exceptional, because she was paying attention, and she refused to let other people's limited imagination become the ceiling of her own. I've been in rooms where I was underestimated, not like she was, I won't pretend otherwise, but I know something about walking in with your work prepared and watching it be dismissed before it's read. What I took from her story is this: the work is the argument, not the explanation, not the credential recitation, not the justification. The work, done exactly and completely, makes its own case. You just have to be patient enough to let it. Fletcher Oakes walked down a hallway and told the truth about what he saw. That mattered. It's easy to forget, in a story about someone who triumphed alone, that integrity in the people around us is its own kind of force. He didn't know it would be noted. He did it. He did it because it was right. That kind of moral steadiness, small, unwitnessed, unstrategic, is rarer than we acknowledge. Fatoumata opened her notebook to the next blank page. She wrote the date. She began. That's the whole lesson, really. Not the title, not the vindication. The next blank page, and the willingness to fill it.